So, in the past, they would have to do the PacketTracer lab with what you saw last week. Like, it will be included this piece too. So it will be, I don't know, 80 steps. So we're gonna do a shorter lab. We are going to revise on what we had learned last week. You had kind of briefly just touched on how to use PacketTracer and adding the devices and connecting the devices and turning them on. In this one, you are going to learn a little bit of command line, and then that's going to help you kind of wrap back up to the lecture that we had prior. So if you're doing it here, you don't need to do part B, but you are going to have to sign on to PacketTracer NetAcad. So because in order to access the app that's already been installed, you have to log on to NetAcad, which is a free account that you can access. Okay. So we'll start with part C, and then we'll finish D, and we'll call it a night, right? So, you're gonna start here, and basically, you don't need to download. You need to log into your account. So when I open up PacketTracer on the school computer, when I click this app, it's going to open this up and it's going to ask for authentication, right? I just need to click the left to log in. And then once I logged in, it's going to give me the canvas to work with. Okay. So I need to log in, and then similar to what we've done last week, but instead of just adding the devices, we are going to use its CLI. So on the canvas space, I have two open. You are going to select your network devices, which is the left icon on the bottom left. And then you are going to try to find, which model am I working with? The 1841. So the 1841 is like second to the right before it goes to the next part. So you're going to select that and just drag it to your workspace. So we just did step 3 of part C. And then you are going to do the same thing, just like what you did last time, right? In this case, we're going to repeat some of the steps where we added the device. So we're going to go to the end devices, and then the PC. We're going to go ahead and drag that in again. And you can move it up further if that's easy for you. So we selected the end devices. We add the desktop PC to the workspace. And then we're going to do that for 2 PCs. So same thing again for the second PC. And then we're going to connect. So that's what you did last week, was to use the cable, right? So this gives you an opportunity to review. So what you're going to do is for the connection, you're going to click on the lightning bolt. That's going to give you the cable selection. And you are going to use the copper crossover, the dotted line, to connect the PC to the router. You're going to select fast Ethernet and fast Ethernet. So coming back here, you're going to click on the lightning bolt on the left. And then here's your copper crossover, the black dotted line. You're going to click it and you're going to connect. And you can go either way, right? I can go from the router. We're going to use the fast Ethernet 0 on the router. And we're going to connect that with the PC. We're going to connect and then use fast Ethernet 0 on the PC. And at first it's going to be red. And the same thing, click the dotted line again. We're going to go from the router. We're going to select the second port, which is the fast Ethernet 01, and then connect that back to the PC and fast Ethernet 0. So we learned this last time, right? Easy. Now, your drawing, it might show red like this because if your endpoint devices and your network appliance is off, it doesn't have any signal, it's going to be red. So we can click the router, make sure that it's on. And the switch, the toggle for it is this, right? It should show the green LED to see it's on. And then you can go to the PC and you make sure that your power is on. Now we have to set up your router appliance, right? And we're going to do that with the command line interface. So it tells you to toggle the power on and make sure you check. So when you turn on, and I can close this, go back to my workspace. When I go to the router, right, I simply click it and I'm going to go to CLI. And this is a command line interface. So realistically, real life, right, I would have a computer that is terminal that's going to be connecting to the router with the console cable to control it, right? So this is going to be my controlling terminal, and I'm going to use the console cable and plug it into the console port, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an application called Putty and set that up to be able to connect to the appliance. So now I can configure, right? That's the reality. On PacketTracer, you just use the appropriate cable and then you turn on the device and then you go to the device command line and be able to configure it, right? So in this case, we're going to configure the router. So click on the CLI tab and then you are going to look at the configuration here. And it's going to tell you, do you want the initial configuration? And we're going to type yes, right? In the cursor right here, type yes, and then press enter. And do you want to do the setup for the management? We're going to type yes again. So let me move this down so I can follow the step with you, right? So we're going to type yes and press enter for step 10. So after step 9 and 10, when we type yes, that we do the initial configuration, we're going to type in the router's name. Most administrator, they just use like R1, R2 for router 1, router 2. It really depends on your enterprise organization preference and schematic on how they call this, right? Or they might have a series of numbers that represent that value. So in this one, we're going to call it R1 for router 1. So you type in the host name, you're going to press R1. Now, in full command line interface, right, in CLI, if we do this with configuration terminal, we're going to have to do host name R1. And that's how, so basically when you answer the question like this, it's going to see it as a command. And then for the secret, this is going to be for authentication purposes. So to enable secret, you can say my Cisco network, right? As what you've seen in step 12. And you can go, use complex, long, the practice for the security. So you should use something with length and symbols and numbers if allowed, right? So in this case, we're going to use my Cisco network, press enter. And then here's the password. We can just do CIS40A exclamation point. And then for the virtual, we're going to change up, right? We're going to say remote Cisco R1. And do you want to configure SNMP? At this point, you don't need to. I think down the line, we can do a lab. I think we have a lab that allows you to do that. Simple network management protocol is very useful. It does have some flaws and vulnerability if you don't use it appropriately, but if you do, there is some risk. But simple network management protocol is going to allow us to track inventory. It would query the other systems to see who's connected. So in the case where you do management console for your network, a lot of the times it uses SNMP, right? So I can use an appliance to manage other appliances. And that's the whole point in SNMP. I can have a router that looks at other routers and switches. I can also use this in a server environment. It doesn't have to be a network appliance or a security appliance, but they do come equipped with this. This allows us to look at other systems that, their status and connectivity and also information. So right now we're going to do a no. Okay. So here I'm at 15. And then what you're going to do is, so what I want is I want to have the information. It tells me that there are the interfaces here, right? It gives you some summary in the current summary for my interfaces. So what does it mean for interface? Interface means connection point or ports, right? We established when we did the command line lecture that we can have a VLAN interface. We can have a physical interface that is connected to Ethernet, fast Ethernet, fiber, and so on. So in this particular appliance, it has two, because the router doesn't have that many Ethernet connection. It only needs to route in and out, because normally you're going to see like a few or a couple, okay? It doesn't need to have like the switch where 48 ports in the front, right? Maybe a console port in the back. The router only needs a couple. Its job is just to route, okay? So you're going to see too, where the switch is going to drop down a big old table telling you these are the ports that it has. So what we're going to do is we're going to access each of the interface by using its stated name. This is important to note, right? Whatever that's shown here, you have to type it as is. Sometimes it is shorthanded, it's okay, but try not to be creative, okay? That means that if you don't match this, it's not going to respond, okay? Because sometimes, like my students, I would have the instruction for other interface and they type it exactly like that. So look at the interface that you have that you're trying to access. Okay, so what we're going to do is just enter the interface name used to connect to the management network for the above interface. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the first interface. That's going to be the console connection for my appliance. So you are going to type fast Ethernet as it's shown, right? 0/0, and then press enter. If you type it correctly, it's going to show that here it says configure interface fast Ethernet 00. Do you want to put in an IP address? So instead of using command IP address and the IP address, it's going to prompt us individually like this, right? In the console. So we are going to do 192.168.10.1. And the reason why we use this was because part of the lab last time that you saw that table that we used, right? We try to use something similar to what they had. So 192.168.10.1. Now, this is going to be the time that when you put in the IP address of that router that you want for that connection, right? Once you press in enter for the IP address, do you want to configure the IP address for this interface? You're going to say yes. Oh, I should have typed yes there. Sorry. I typed. So 192.168.10.1. 10.1. So yes, and then the IP address. So it says, do you want to use the default subnet mask, right? Is the subnet mask like this? So you can type in the subnet mask as the example shown, because we're using class full address. 255.255.0. So out of the box, your routers, when you turn it on, it's going to prompt you like this to walk you through the process on how to configure the very basic to the actual appliance, right? Here it tells me, oh, there are 3 options. You can go to the operating system command prompt for configuration. I can go back to the setup without the saving, or I can save. So we want to save, right? Because the whole point in having all of that information put in, you're going to put in number 2 to save. And it's going to take time to write this into the RAM now of the storage of the system. So after this, what will happen is it's going to bring you back into the privilege mode, okay? And then from there, we are going to enable and go to the global configuration mode, and we're going to see if we can change this IP address, okay, for the second interface. Because we put the first interface at 0/0 because it has 2. The first one is a .10, right? The second one is going to be .20. See if that takes, okay? Let's change the state down. Okay, press enter, and then you are going to get back to the R1. And then we are going to continue with step 21. So now I'm in I need to get into the configuration mode. So I need to get from the privilege mode into configuration mode. And you just need to do enable, right? We talked about that a couple weeks ago. So when you type enable, it's going to ask for your password and then come back to your password, which is CIS40A with an exclamation point. And it's Linux, so the cursor doesn't change. Oops. If I can type it correctly. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, my Cisco network. It's a secret. My Cisco. Oh, fancy. My Cisco. There you go. So you have to put in the secret instead of your password is to access your secret now, right? Your secret is going to be replacing your traditional password. So you notice that now once we enable your arrow changes to the hashtag, and that allows you to go into the configuration mode. You need to enable and then get there. So once we have that, we're here. Then we're going to do config term. And you can type out configuration terminal. And notice that you have the config term change like this. So it would put the configuration mode is on, that it is in the parentheses. And then you are going to specify the interface, right? We don't have the prompt anymore, so we have to say interface. And then fast, Ethernet 0/1, which is the secondary. There are 2. And then once it takes it, you are going to see config IF, right? That means that you're in the interface now. we can go ahead and specify, and now we want to set the IP address for it. IP address, and then type in 192.168.20.1. Now, some administrator or technician, they would leave it like this and configure the default gateway later, but ideally I recommend that you put in the subnet mask with the IP address. So 255.255.255.0. So we're using a classful IP address. It is a class C, right? With the appropriate subnet mask, the default subnet mask. And it took it, right? If there's error, your pop-up won't show up. It's going to say bad command or something like that. And then we're going to do no shutdown. Now, earlier we mentioned that we want to come back to your SNMP, which is Simple Network Management Protocol. We can turn this appliance into a system that manages other appliances. We can do that for automation purposes, inventory tracking, a lot of things. Check link states for the other routers or check the protocols that's used. So once you have the no shutdown, we're going to go ahead and press enter to get back to the configuration. Now, in this interface, right, remember that we are in the fast Ethernet 01. We're going to say SNMP server community public R0. Or read only RO, I'm sorry, RO. Okay, so what it will do is going to activate the SNMP agent for this particular host. And what this will do is it's going to enable read only for everybody, all the other systems, but as an SNMP server, right? It's able to view. So now if you don't want changes, right? If you don't want changes to your system, you're going to put public read only. They can only view. Now, if you want modification, so it says to allow read and write, use command SNMP server community private read write. So this is basically a way that we can standardize, right, the monitoring of the network. You can use a system to monitor other network. Just like any C base, right? Because this is embedded Linux, you're going to do a get to obtain information. You saw this with PowerShell, a set to set configuration, and then you can also have it alert, which is notifications. Right? I put a link here so you can also put in information. So I did the public read only. I'm going to go ahead and change that to the private. We want to do the private read write. So SNMP server community private read. And so now it changes for the private option is to be able to store, right, and modify, save and modify. Now we are going to do a static route. In the static route, you need to tell it the network address, right? The subnet mask, and then where to. Okay? Which router? So we're going to do IP route. And remember that I'm still in the configuration mode, right? 192.168.10.0. That's the network address. And then we're going to do the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. And then the destination 10.0. I'm sorry, 10.10.10.2, completely different network because that's easy. That's because it's a router. It's able to go from one network to then the other network, right? That's its job. So it took that what we just did was we set up a static route. Okay. So we set route from this network into this network through this device, the .2. It could be like 10.10.10.1 or .100, depending on your destination device, where you want to route that to. And then you can check what is my route, right? You're going to do IP routing. And now what you're going to do is you have to activate this route. So we're going to do router RIP, right? So we talked about routing protocol version 1 and version 2. This is ideal for small and medium networks. Just keep in mind that in security, we know that RIP has vulnerability, but it is enabled in many routing. In that case, you know, the attacker can capitalize on your protocol. So you just got to make sure that you manage your system accordingly if you're using a vulnerable protocol. So it is a stable using distance vector, right? We calculate the sum of the distance, like how many miles from your home to school, and the lowest miles is going to be the choice. So we want RIP, but we want version 2. Okay. Now, if it's equipped with RIP 1 and RIP 2, you can just specify it. But if there's only RIP 1 because it's an older appliance, that's what you're going to use. Okay. So you set your route and you tell it how it's going to use that route. Then next, what we're going to do is we are going to specify, right, the networks that are going to use that protocol. So you're using a network command and the IP address. Okay. So after we set the protocol, we want to say how that's going to apply to which network, right? Remember that we could have 8 subnets like what we talked about earlier. You just need to tell them, you just need to put in the command, which router that needs to apply that to, right? Okay, so we had that, the interface, the fast Ethernet 00, that's a .10.1. Okay, you got to track yourself because if there's 100 routers, you got to make sure you put it in the right one, otherwise it routes the wrong one. Okay, so make sure that we track the IP address that we're using. Okay, now what we can do is sometimes we don't want a bunch of summarizations and a lot of routes, right? That could be a very long table. If you want auto summary, you can issue the auto summary command. If you don't want the details, you can do the no auto summary command. And then exit. And then you can exit out of this one, but you can do an N, which takes you back to before the configuration mode, right? You have, at this point, you have to enable and then go back to config term, right? So you're going to press enter and it's going to come back to the enable mode already. We're going to do a write memory. So write memory is going to save that to your virtual RAM, or your virtual RAM, which is the storage space that we would have on the router itself. So when after you configure what you want, right, you get out of the configuration mode and then you said, take all of that information and save it now. So we're going to so it builds a configuration and then it's okay. If it has a hard time writing or maybe the buffer is full, it will tell you the status there. Okay, so we're here, right? So to return to the privilege exec mode, you would do exit. And this is the before, right? Like when you turn it on, or it should not be turned off, but before you configure. So in order to access it again, we're going to press enter, right? And then when you see the arrow, always enable. Now, after I put in my password and password go back to number 12, my Cisco network. And so when we get to that, after we input in our secret, oops, I went too far. I'm going to do a show running config. Oops. Running dash config. So it tells me that all of these configuration are applied to the system, right? After you config, you save, you exit out of it if you want to come back and see what's happening with your system. If there's any kind of other configuration that you need, you go back and you enable, which takes you to the privilege mode, not the global mode. Then you would do a show running config. This tells you, right? I don't have service password encryption. There are other things. I configured the host name. There's password and there's secret. It's encrypted. So, the plain text now is converted to non-plain text, right? I just press enter and keep going, and it's gonna give me a long list of things. I don't have IPCDF. So there's more. And then spanning tree, we talked about STP, right? That mode. And then, but I did configure earlier, right? My interface fast Ethernet 0, my IP address for that, the router, right? And I also set route for it. So it shows my subnet mask and my IP. Automatically, these are default, but you can just type in the communication mode that you want. We touched on this in the lecture a couple weeks ago, right? Or last week. And then I also set set IP for the second interface. Same thing. And then VLAN I haven't set up. And then the RIP, I specified that I want version 2. My network. And then my route, right? So you want the detailed information, So we keep pressing enter. And then I have the read only for public, for SNMP server, and then the private read write. And then my remote access, password information, and that's the summary. So now you know how to view it to see if the stuff that you configure is saved or running. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do a show IP interface brief. And this is less detail. I like to do brief because it's just less pressing enter or more. You have to go down, right? So it's going to give you a table with all the things that you kind of set up for that interface, like the IP address and the status. So it's the state of the interface, because remember, it's show IP interface. Take a screenshot of this. And now, voila, it's green. Yeah, so it worked. Okay, so screenshot your topology with the CLI, so that way it shows that you did it. And then what you can do is you can put in the IP address for the default gateway for these systems, that it's going to point back to the router, because we don't just configure one way. We have to configure all the both ways for both systems to communicate, right? So if I click one of the IP, I go to the config, the default gateway, right? So I put in the IP address. So here it tells me that So I'll do the first one to confuse you less because I remember that we configure it both ways. So we're gonna do this one. Yeah, so 192.168.10.1. And then this one is 192. That's the second interface. So 192.168.20.1. Okay. And if you want to remove the PC, you can right click or you can also press the delete button. So select it. Oops. Click the X, like third next to the arrow, the glass. So you can exit. But okay. Now we can extend our network. So what we're going to do is you are going to properly set this up. Okay. We have a terminal computer that's going to use for configuring the router. Ideal, right? That will be next to the rack. Now on the rack, you are going to physically add a switch. Okay. So this is going to be connected to your router. And then from that switch, we're going to add a server and additional, this is very small scale business. So ideally, I would bridge another switch and then add these and then put some security appliance here. But this is going to be the layout that you want. So we are going to take this and modify it, right? So we're, yes, question?
What IP address we put the default gateway
For the second one on the right,
for 42?
so there are two. The right hand side is 192.168.20.1. Why? Is because it's the second interface that I connect my PC to, right? Remember when we programmed the fast Ethernet 0/1 is the second interface and it holds this IP address. On the left, right, you can check it by hovering over it and it tells you which interface is which, right? Look. Right? See, the first one is the .10.1. So on the left, I would put in the 192.168.10.1. It's the first interface, which is the 0/0. Okay, we gotta track them and do it appropriately. Can you put two on one interface? Physically, no. You cannot connect two systems into one port, one physical port. I cannot squeeze two cable into one connection, right? So logically, it's the same. Okay. Other questions? All right. So the next part, you are going to modify this. We're going to drag 2096 switch onto the canvas and then connect it with a dotted line again. So what I can do, let me close this here. I'm going to go to network devices, the 2096. Is that the one? Oh, the 9060. Sorry, 2960. These are the routers. Switch is the, you gotta go to the next icon on the right. And it's the first one here. So we'll just drag it there. We click the delete. Yeah, I'm gonna delete the PC. And then I'm gonna go to the lightning bolt. I'm gonna take my cable and I'm gonna connect it from the switch And it's going to be, we're gonna do fast Ethernet. Okay. Yeah, so just do the first, so, okay, let's, I didn't put this step down, but let's think about that. This switch has 24 fast Ethernet in the front. There are 2 in the back. We can go with the gigabit Ethernet 001, which is going to be faster. That's ideal. Can you do fast Ethernet to fast Ethernet? Sure, right? But because if we go gigabit Ethernet, it's gonna throttle because the router is older. It's only able to do fast Ethernet anyway, right? So ideally, we would then need to upgrade the router to gigabit Ethernet so we can have a faster backbone. Your router is fast. It's kind of like, you know, you put an engine in a car that's super fast, but you're only able to drive it like 30 miles per hour. So gigabit to fast Ethernet. Let's try that. You know what? I'm sorry.
Which one did you put?
So when you add the switch, let's do fast Ethernet. So fast Ethernet to fast Ethernet, because the router is best speed is fast Ethernet. And then what you're gonna do is, you know how to get into this now? Click it, go to CLI, and we have to know the step, right? Press enter. What do I do from here? How do I get from here to the next? I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah, because I changed my mind about that. I would not want to do gigabit. It's just throttle it and it's a waste. It's just a newer switch. Like, let's say that you have an old router and you buy a new switch, right? It's gonna be so physically it's wrong because I feel like the first port connecting to it, but you can do that. You know, you should connect it to the back port, which is the gigabit Ethernet, and it's gonna throttle it. It will be like bottleneck at the router because it's kind of like 5 lanes into one or 100 lanes into one lane, which is gonna be slow. But yeah, fast Ethernet to fast Ethernet is probably just efficient. Okay, so here we click on the switch, right? We go to CLI and we press enter and it opens this up. What do I do next now? So, enable, when you see the arrow, always enable. What do I do next? Config term. This is when you have to remember your lecture and what the steps that you've done. So now I'm in the configuration terminal. I need to set the IP addresses right. Let's reference the other part, right? I don't need to set route. I just need to get to the interface. So interface. And so earlier I had you check, right? Once it has the IP. So we just gotta make sure that the interface for the switch is correct. So yeah, it's just the same as the one that you had. So the fast Ethernet 0/1, right? That's the one that we're gonna use. Okay? Because that's the one I connected, right? So interface fast Ethernet 0/1. Now I'm in the interface configuration. What do I do next? It's easy. I'm already in the interface, right? I just need to set the IP address and the subnet mask. So it tells me in part C that I need to put in the IP address that's given, this, with the subnet mask. It's the same subnet mask. So 192.168.10.5 and then 255.255.255.0. Oh, sorry, IP address 192.168.10.5 and then follow that with the subnet mask. I didn't like that. Sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, maybe, hold on. It's not the right switch. Because if it's not layer 3, you cannot put in. Yeah, it looks like it's you cannot use it like this. Yeah, it's not routable switch. It doesn't like the command. Hold on. Oh, it's switch. Forgot. I'm rusty with my Cisco. You guys remember? When we use the switch, what do we need? I have to check the interface real quick to make sure that it's able to get IP address. And the way that I did that was I have to get out of the configuration mode into the read-only mode, which is my privilege mode. And then I do the show IP interface brief. It tells me that these are the ports that's allowable for the IP address. You see that here? And it hasn't been assigned. But earlier, I tried to use IP address, but remember that's for the router, right? I think it's switch port. What was it, that 10.5? Oh, it didn't like the IP address here either. Hold on 1 second. Huh? Yeah, it didn't want the IP address. 2960, right? I forgot. I apologize. It doesn't allow it's a catalyst. Okay, I got it. Switch back. Okay, so you saw that I couldn't use this, right? This is an older switch. It's the Catalyst 2960, and I had to look it up with Cisco because there are different models and different things, and we don't exactly have the specification. You saw a little bit of it earlier. So depending on the switch, some switch you can treat it as a router where it would receive the router command in this case, even if you use the switch port. But based on now AI is given me from Cisco website, in order to configure it as an IP address, you have to do an interface VLAN. Yeah, so we're gonna do an exit and then interface. I think it has a VLAN, right? I'm sorry. Let me go back up and I'm gonna look up the VLAN information. So it's not able to, I think I close it. The VLAN 1, I think. Yep. So I'm gonna write down the step here so you can follow along. So to do this part, right? Press enter. We're gonna enable config term. Interface VLAN 1. Am I right so far? And then we're gonna do IP address. And then the IP address. And then the subnet mask. That work? Oops. Yep. I forgot that it's a catalyst and I used to work on the catalyst. So, right, the point of this is that when you have a switch that is not able to route like this one, it's able to use VLAN only. It won't take the router command like IP address. It doesn't function fully as a router like this. You have to set it up through a virtual local area network port, right? And then at this point, we would do a switch port, set up the VLAN to the physical port, which is your fast Ethernet 01 to 05 or whatever. Group those ports into that VLAN. And then we can we can say that those ports belong to this IP address, for example. We can use that for forwarding. You can use that for segregation. A lot of things. Plug in other computers to those ports and treat it as part of this network. Okay. So that's how you can do that. So I'm gonna try to finish that. And okay. And then if you want the summary, you get out of it, right? So do an exit, exit again, press enter, and then show IP interface brief. Press more, and there's your VLAN. Bye. There you go. So show IP interface brief. But you have to get out of the config mode to the privilege mode where it's the hashtag. So you're gonna do exit and then show IP interface brief. So I'll type that here. So exit, show IP interface. So when you work with the routers and the switch realistically, right, on the physical appliance, you have to think about the procedure on how to get information into the system and out of the system, the output that you see. So it would be like this. So show interface brief is going to give you, and then you press enter until you get to the VLAN. And it's only able to store the IP address on this particular catalyst for that, right? And then you can add more PC to the switch at this point. And it tells you that it is not fully functional. It is administrative down. We added the IP, but we haven't activated that. You haven't grouped the ports or turned on the VLAN. But we screenshot that and then so I added part D because I think you can do this either here in the next 15 minutes or you can do it outside, right? This is something that is already pre-created for you, kind of like what you've done last week, and then you save it. You can download it from our lab assignment. I added the file here, and then you can save it to your downloads and then import that into PacketTracer. And you should install PacketTracer on your home computer to practice, right? Add a switch and just go ahead at it, right? Go to CLI to enable config term and then set up IP addresses and see how it works. And then add another switch, add a router, right? Okay. So once you have this, we can close this. We're done with that one. You can save it if you want. And then I didn't add, like, you can. But I need to. So add a bunch of PC here, right? And then add the cable. Yeah. Just connect. There you go. And then you just connect different ports to it, right? So you can just use the copper straight through. And then okay, so for the part D, you just have to, let's save this one. Once you're done with whatever, put it on your USB or your cloud. And then we can call this part C or lab 8C. I'm gonna make sure I put it on a different area. Otherwise, it's gonna default into PacketTracer folder. Just make sure you know where you save it. I'll put it on my downloads. Or my USB. Okay, so everything's good there, right? Now new file. So we're gonna go ahead and go file, open. Yes. I don't want that. File, open. Yes. And we are going to download the ones from Canvas. We're gonna select that to click open. So basically it has a template for you, kind of like what you've done. You are going to have two switches, two catalysts, 2960. You're going to connect them together and then you are going to connect them to these PCs. So it would be like this. So we are going to drag them in, right? Because it just have the text label and then drag in the PCs. Connect the switch. Remember that when you're connecting the same devices, they need to be crossover cable. We talked about that during week 2. Okay. And then the switch to the PC, you can use the copper straight through. So here it gives you the step to do that. And then you would connect them together and it would look like this. Okay. You don't need to CLI configure. You just gotta make sure that the cables are connected, everything's turned on, and we're good. It takes seconds to do that. Now, if you want to be fancy, go into the switches and repractice the command that we've done, right? Give it a name, switch 1, switch 2, switch 0, switch 10, S1, S0. And then set up a VLAN, right? Go back to the notes from the prior, do a switch port command. It's really, PacketTracer has endless things. So I go to network devices, click on the switch, 2960, drag it in where it's placed. The other one the same. Go to end devices, drag my PC in, right? Make it look beautiful. And then the same thing over here. Take seconds to do that. And then go to click on the lightning bolt for the media communications and then connect that. And then if you want to practice, do the CLI for it, right? Use command line, give it a name, set up the VLANs for the switches. If you want to, save it, take a screenshot, submit everything once it's connected with the cable and turning on green. Right? And then you can modify it. The whole point in PacketTracer is definitely customizable and practice, right? I can throw in a router, connect the switch to the router, configure the router, set up the ports on the router, the IP addresses for the interface, and so on, right? So I encourage you to practice, and then so that way when you troubleshoot, why is it not taking my IP? Does this switch take IP command? Can it route, right? Any question? Okay. So I want you to answer 62. What have you learned about switch and router configuration after doing this lab? Right? How can you apply these concepts in your future career, or if you're currently working in IT, how can you apply this? And this is just tip of the iceberg. I really encourage you to practice. So I'm gonna think about assigning it. I'm probably gonna do it as an extra credit. I'll show you. I haven't turned it on yet. So Cisco Academy or NetAcad has wonderful tutorials for you to use, files for you to use, right? Like I got the PacketTracer file from the Cisco Academy. I did create a module separately, and in the past, I require it as a requirement. But I'm really thinking that I'm going to open this up and I'm going to give you the opportunity to do it as an extra credit. It goes through the module, but with that, I have to add a class to Cisco Academy and then invite you to the class. Okay. So when you click that link, it's going to add you from Canvas to the course. So I will open it for a while, and I think for every exercise that you do, I'll probably give you some points for it. And then I will bring some points over from the packet from Cisco Academy. But with that, I think that, without the assignment, you have access to it and you can download it and install it. And I encourage you to practice it, especially if you're going to go for Cisco certification. But even if you don't, practice it. Okay. Like I am not Cisco certified, but I have used some of the devices and I kind of remember the basic, and that's good because you can always reference their manual or their documentation. But you need to have the basic, like how do you get from here to here? Okay. All right. Are we okay? Need any help? Okay, let me help her and then I'll come back to you. And then we'll do it. No, you don't open the file and double click. You gotta click file to close that. Close that app. And then you saved this already, right? Okay, go file, open. And then yes. And then go to where you download the first from, is that the one you downloaded? From the campus. Yeah, open it. And then here you just drag the device where the placeholder is at. And then connect with the cable like the picture. You got it? Okay, let me stop record.